Word. And that's what we're trying to do on Exploring the Word.
Exploring the Word, weekday afternoons at 3 Central on American Family Radio. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Robert Thornton. Details are emerging about the illegal alien arrested in connection with the killing of a woman aboard a New York City subway train. Here's Fox's Nate Foy.
A man who police say entered the United States from Guatemala in 2018 is described as a person of interest after a woman got lit on fire and died inside a subway car in Brooklyn. As captured by the New York Post, police arrested the person of interest after getting tipped off by 3 high schoolers who recognized his wanted picture that police posted on social media. Cameras installed in the subway system helped capture a clear image of him and led police to understand what happened during the attack. It happened at 7:30 Sunday morning. Police won't say much about the victim. They said it appeared that she was sleeping when the suspect lit her on fire.
The suspect had been charged with a previous crime in Arizona. No details about the charge have been revealed. Luigi Mangione pleads not guilty to murder and weapons charges in the United Healthcare CEO's death. The Manhattan District Attorney formally charged Mangione last week with multiple counts of murder, including murder as an act of terrorism. Mangione's attorney complained during a brief hearing today that statements coming from New York's mayor could make it tough for him to receive a fair trial. The Democrats conducting postmortems on their losses in 2024 finding more reason for alarm. And the problem isn't just Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, according to Politico. In a trio of focus groups, even voters who previously backed Democrats cast the party as weak and overly focused on diversity and elites, according to research by the progressive group Navigator Research. When asked to compare the Democrat Party to an animal, one participant compared the party to an ostrich because they've got their heads in the sand and are absolutely committed to their own ideas even when they're failing. The Wall Street Journal finally said the quiet part out loud. President Joe Biden has been mentally compromised from the very beginning of his term in office, and his staff and the media knew it. AFN's Steve Jordahl has more.
Former CNN reporter Chris Cillizza apologized on Friday.
I should have pushed harder earlier for more information about Joe Biden's mental and physical well-being and any signs of decline.
This after the Wall Street Journal published an article that revealed the President of the United States was having good and bad days from day one of his term in office. Cillizza says he brushed off any suspicions he had and said Biden's team were trying to gaslight the media and the American people the whole time.
The White House and the people around Joe Biden were absolutely adamant that suggesting anything about whether he was in some physical, mental, or both decline was offensive.
But Curtis Houck of Media Research Center says the White House, the media, and the rest of the country knew what they saw with their own eyes.
This is a generational scandal on the part of the news media and those that served in this outgoing White House.
He says it's nice to hear an apology, but he's not buying the fact that Cillizza didn't know.
It's revisionist history to say, oh, well, we should have done more.
Oh, and by the way, Biden is still president.
You just wonder if there's some sort of international crisis in the next month, who's going to be on the phone?
I'm Steve Jordahl.
President Joe Biden's last-minute emissions goal could be quickly reversed when Donald Trump takes office, according to Fox. In 2021, Biden set a climate target for the U.S. to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 50 to 52% from 2005 levels by 2030. His new target, which was formally submitted to the United Nations, seeks to reduce emissions 61 to 66% by 2035. The weather may disrupt Christmas travel plans for some. Here's Fox Weather's Ian Oliver.
Some pretty good news as far as travel across the country. Boston leading the way, but you look at Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson, the world's busiest airport, single-digit percentage for total flight disruptions. That's a good number on a pre-Christmas Monday. Boston, Logan got a little bit more than 5 inches of snow. Finally, winter got started. First part of the weekend, Fenway Park. It was more like a half a foot. All of a sudden, JFK sneaking onto that list. That's mostly related to issues with volume. We do have a storm system farther off to the west. It's a clipper moving across the Great Lakes.
Find more news online at afn.net. I'm Robert Thornton.
Streaming.afa.net has now become AFA Stream, and you can find it at stream.afa.net. You see, we removed the letters ing. Our experts have determined that eliminating those 3 keystrokes, multiplied over hundreds of thousands of AFA stream visits, could reduce the national debt and maybe increase the gross domestic product. AFA Stream, formerly streaming.afa.net. Improvements to the economy are purely theoretical. We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. Glad to have you with us on the program today. I'm Walker Wildmon, and this is At the Core here on American Family Radio. We're going to have a special guest in the second and the third and talk about some very important topics, including what happened on January 6th and whose lives that has affected. So all that's coming up here in a little while. But when we get started this first segment, I do want to turn our attention to the scripture. We are in Psalm 142 this week. I cry aloud with my voice to the Lord. I make supplication with my voice to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare my trouble before him. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, you knew my path and the way where I walk. They have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, for there is no one who regards me. There is no escape for me. No one cares for my soul. I cried, this is verse 5, I cried out to the Lord, and I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. So that's verses 1 through 5 in Psalm 142. But the portion of this that I want to point out is that our tongues can be our tongues are a sword, or can be used as a weapon. They can either, our tongue and our words can either uplift and encourage, or they can tear down. That's what the scripture says. And in this instance, the writer here is talking about making a supplication before the Lord and petitioning the Lord really to intervene and help protect him from his enemies. But what I want to highlight is that our tongue, our words can either be used for good or for evil. And so really consider that as you go about your day and your week and your month. Use your tongue and your words to build up as opposed to tearing down. So that's my encouragement from the scripture on this edition of the program. Well, I've got several news stories this first segment, and then in the next 2 segments we'll jump to our guest. This was a shocking story out of Georgia, and if I read the headline to you, you probably wouldn't believe it. But a Georgia homeowner was jailed after trying to remove an alleged squatter from her home. So this is out of, Clayton County, Georgia. And Lalitha Hale is the name of the homeowner, but she shows up, and I don't know how long she was gone from the residence. Clearly, it was probably a time, right? I don't know whether she was on vacation or went to see, family out of state. But nonetheless, she showed up at her home in Georgia, and there was a squatter there, right? Someone who had trespassed and someone who had basically set up shop in her house, in this lady's house in Georgia. And so she does what the police recommend, and she called law enforcement. Well, that actually backfired, which it shouldn't, but that's what happened. And she ended up getting arrested. Yes, I'm not making this up. The homeowner ended up getting arrested. Now, all of this ended up sorting itself out, but she went through, a not good situation before, the right side prevailed. And the law enforcement, I mean, they were absolutely brutal to her in the sense that they were treating her like she was in the wrong. I'm talking about the homeowner. And so I bring this up because this has actually happened a lot in the last, I say a lot, it's happened several times over the last few years. And that is the squatter laws, the laws on handling trespassers who have been like dwelling on your property for days or weeks or sometimes months. The laws on the books in some of these states is arcane, it's outdated. It doesn't know how to handle these situations. And Florida actually updated their statute, I think last year. It might have been in 2022, but over the last probably 12 or 24 months, Florida updated their statute that allowed for expedited removal of squatters. And this isn't rocket science. I mean, this is not hard stuff, right? I mean, you find out who the lawful homeowner is, and you can do that in a matter of minutes by examining driver's license, passport, birth certificate, mortgage documents, right? There's 100 ways to figure out who owns the house. And then whoever doesn't own the house, they need to be removed, right? It's as simple as that. This is not complicated stuff here. But leave it to, law enforcement and attorneys and judges and district attorneys to overcomplicate things. And so every state needs to update their criminal trespass code, including their squatter code, to provide for Florida's type expedited removal process for criminal trespassers. And I really feel terrible for this lady in Clayton County, Georgia, who was arrested because she called the cops because somebody else was breaking the law. I mean, think about how backwards this is. And these officers, I haven't watched the video, but it's apparently pretty infuriating how these officers handled this situation. The alleged squatter, put it this way, was not charged in the case and wasn't arrested on the scene. The homeowner was arrested. So Georgia, this happened in August, by the way. So this story's come and gone, but it's been developing in court, right? Because there's been hearings and stuff. So we're just now kind of getting the full story. But supposedly, one event happened in August with this homeowner, and then this most recent incident happened on December 9th. So this has kind of been playing itself out, over the last several months. But this is, reason number 795 why states need to update their statute to deal with these trespassers and these squatters. Because imagine if that was your house. Like if I showed up and there's a dude in my house, number one, there's this thing called castle doctrine. So there's that, right? And then there's self-defense statutes. So I don't know, if in some areas that these squatters would make it out alive, especially if your life was threatened. But so quite brave of them, actually. But you go to some states like California, and there's actually more provisions to protect the squatters than there is to protect the homeowners, and it's quite baffling. But nonetheless, that's one story I wanted to mention. And the homeowner, whose last name is Hale, Hale, she actually ended up getting exonerated, or she got out. Everything got dismissed, and she's able to move on. But the fact that she had to go through this whole situation is just a travesty. Just a travesty. And especially for people who are who have multiple homes, right, in multiple states, who like to travel. I mean, if you're this probably is less likely to happen to someone who doesn't travel and who lives at their primary residence for, every day and doesn't really have a secondary residence. But think about these people who have vacation houses, beach houses, or like to go and travel and see family for weeks at a time. This has to be a legitimate concern in some of these states, these squatter provisions. So, and the audacity that these trespassers have. I mean, some of them know the statute. They know what the rules are. They know how to kind of get by according to the law. And but this is where common sense, clearly died here. And we shouldn't have to have clarification on the state statute to remove squatters from people's properties. But if that's what it takes to write the remedy here, to bring a remedy, then that's what we got to do, right? In all 50 states, is we got to update the provisions on the statutes on trespass and squatters, and allow for law enforcement to remove these people, these trespassers, on scene. I mean, we don't need to have a hearing, and that's what Florida did. Is they just said, look, let's just bypass this garbage, this mumbo jumbo, this hearing, all this stuff that takes time and energy and money over something so rudimentary like, hey, this person doesn't belong on my property and I'm the homeowner and I can show you 7 reasons why I'm the homeowner. Get this person off my property. Florida just said, look, forget all this. We're not complicating this, because what was happening is you had to go and go to court and prove that you were the homeowner. And it was just patently absurd. It's like, wait, so let me get this right. I show up at my house and somebody else is trespassing on my property, and you want me to get an attorney, pay for an attorney, and take time out of my day to come to court to prove to you that I'm the homeowner. No. This is not how this works. So Florida actually did away with all that. And all you have to do in Florida is show law enforcement on scene, by the way, in real time, is show law enforcement that you're the rightful owner of the property, and then they will arrest and remove anybody and everybody that you tell them to that you don't want on your property. So sanity thriving, alive and well in the state of Florida. Imagine that. Every state needs to handle this. And it also shows the audacity and this kind of boldness. I don't want to use the word boldness because that's traditionally been used in a positive light, and these are not positive people, but let's just say audacity. The audacity of these people to not only trespass, it's one thing to break the law, but then to act like it's your house. I mean, think about the arrogance here. But isn't that indicative of where we are as a culture? That we don't only break the law, but we break the law and then we stand in defiance that somehow we're in the right. I mean, if this isn't the passage where in Scripture where it prophesies and it predicts that one day right will become wrong and wrong will be called right, or right will be called wrong and wrong will be called right, and that will become. But people will call what's right wrong and wrong right. That pretty much sums up where we are here. We've got dudes calling themselves girls, and anybody who questions it, gets called a bigot. We've got men trying to think that they can marry men, right? Even though we know that's not a true marriage, and anybody who calls it out gets called a bigot and a homophobe. And then we've got squatters acting like they can just trespass on people's property and get out of there scot-free. And then we've got illegal immigrants who think they can just trespass into our country and that we somehow owe them something. So there's this completely upside-down culture that we're living in, and we've got to continue speaking truth and sanity into it. You're listening to At the Core, Walker Wildmon. We'll be back in a few minutes.
shall not covet your neighbor's house or anything that's your neighbor's. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, an economic system that allows billionaires to exist is immoral. Someone may want to let the former bartender turned congresswoman know that the top 1% of wage earners pay nearly 50% of all federal taxes. The top 10% of wage earners pay nearly 70% of all federal taxes, and the top 20% of wage earners pay about 85% of all federal taxes. That money funds things like our national welfare programs. Don't let them entice you to harbor disdain for the wealthy. Socialists bank on covetousness to gain support for their regressive policies.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Hey, it's Michael Woolworth with Bible League International, and what a joy and comfort those words bring when we read those in our own Bible in the early part of John's Gospel. He tells us that God made good on His promise to give us Jesus, right, who's with us and He's for us. To think there's Bible-less believers around the world who have been denied God's Word. They've never been able to read the Christmas story for themselves, but oh, the joy of thinking of many Christians who will have that privilege this year.
I am Lisbeth. I am 10 years old and live in Peru with my mom and sisters. My dad died last year. We would like a Bible to read every day when we wake up. Thank you.
Our prayer is to bless 7,000 waiting Christians this Christmas. AFR listening family, you've blessed 3,000. We've got 4,000 to go by December 31st at $5 a Bible. $100 sends 20. $500 sends 100. Would you pray about it and call 800-YES-WORD? 800-YES-WORD. That's 800-YES-WORD, or give it sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org, and God bless you for caring.
Hello, everyone. Tim Wildmon here with American Family Association and American Family Radio. Hey, in 2025, we have a brand new tour available. It's in October, and it's going to Boston. What a wonderful trip this will be to see one of the most significant cities in all of American history. Boston, Lexington, Concord, and the whole story of the Freedom Trail. It's going to be absolutely wonderful, and that's in October of 2025. So we also have the tours of Washington, D.C. and Mount Vernon, and then the Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown tours as well. So that's coming up in 2025. If you want to read about any of these, go to wildmangroup.com, WILDMON group.com, wildmangroup.com, for all the information on Boston, D.C., and Williamsburg. Hope to see you on one of these in 2025.
At the Core podcasts are available at AFR.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to The Core. Walker Wildman here with you on American Family Radio. Please, please, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just type in At the Core, and you'll find the program, and then click the subscribe button, or the plus icon is typically how it's displayed. And the show will be queued up in your library each and every day. This is we're heading into year end and Christmas and New Year. And so if you value American Family Radio and you appreciate our work, feel free to go over to AFR.net and donate as we head into the end of this year and into next year. We are headed, we got several tours. My dad and my brother and I, we've been doing these tours for several years. My dad's been doing it for nearly 30 tours of Washington, D.C., Williamsburg, Israel, the Holy Land. We're adding in Boston in 2025. We're going to be going to Boston, touring the Freedom Trail, Plymouth Rock, a litany of other sites, John Adams' home and State Park, and there's probably a dozen more sites that I haven't mentioned. But we're going to be going to Boston, looking at early American history, looking at God's providence on our founding fathers and colonial America. So all of that's taking place in 2025. If you want to check out those tour dates and register, find out more information, you can go over to wildmangroup.com, wildmangroup.com. We'll be going to D.C., Washington, D.C., Williamsburg, Jamestown, Yorktown, Boston. We'll also be going in 2026. We'll be going to Israel and we're bringing up a new tour, the Footsteps of Paul tour in Greece. So a lot more coming down the road, but we've got several offerings over at wildmongroup.com. So go there, check it out, and we've got Christian tours from a obviously a biblical perspective, covering a lot of America's early history in Boston, D.C., and Williamsburg. So go over to wildmongroup.com for more information. Well, I do want to introduce our next guest. His name is Tommy Tatum. He's a resident of the state of Mississippi, the Magnolia State where I'm from, and he also was involved in January 6th and got really tied up in that. And the Department of Justice has been going after him. And we want to hear his story and kind of hear what he's been through in the last few years. So, Tommy, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Walker. I appreciate it. And I always have a soft spot from the radio industry because that's where I come from. I was managing 10 radio stations for a private owner here in Mississippi before what happened on January the 6th. And that's what kind of led me to be there, as I was doing independent news on a local website, and felt like I should go to the Capitol and cover Donald Trump's speech, basically, what I was wanting to do. And I can go into a little detail if you'd like.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's kind of give us your background or your story, your kind of side of the story. We're trying to highlight these January 6 cases, by the way, because there's been, while, we're not excusing anything and everything that took place on that day, it was largely a peaceful demonstration and protest, and the DOJ has just taken this overboard and really handled this out of proportion. So that's why we want to cover these stories. But yeah, Tommy, go ahead and tell us your story.
Okay, so it's a really long story, but I always jump straight to the most important thing that happened to me today. And I am a Christian, and I know this is a family radio station, so I'm going to share a small testimony of my Christian faith and something God did throughout all this during the story. But most important thing that happened to me that day is I was beside Roseanne Boylan when she was beaten to death by a police officer named Lila Morse, a Metro police officer. So what had happened very, very briefly is at 4:20, the police officers in the back of the tunnel fired 31 pepper ball rounds, and it caused chaos amongst the police officers and the protesters. And the police officers pushed everybody out of the tunnel. And when they did that, it pushed Roseanne Boylan. She fell into me, and then we all fell on the ground, and then people fell on top of us. And I was trapped beside her for 8 minutes. People were on top of my leg, and I couldn't move. And all of this is the little tunnel area where the president comes out to do the inauguration, right there. So as a result of that, the police officers, when they did the investigations, they said that Roseanne Boylan died of a drug overdose in her body. But as an extension of being in the movement, I've gone on to be a video research expert, and I know all the other video research experts, and I've made lots of documentaries with people. We have it on footage, and if you look up the hashtag or the @JimPaxton account on Twitter, all my work I've ever done is on. So my life story is dedicated to getting I want people to know about Roseanne Boylan and how she was murdered by her government and then smeared as a drug addict. She happened to have been about 7 years clean, what I think I had been studying to be a drug counselor. So she had turned her life around, and as a former extra insulting to the family, I think they do as well, to say that she died of a drug overdose because she had a prescription of Ritalin that she was not abusing for 8 years. And most people will find it absolutely astonishing. She had the same corner as George Floyd. So there's a lot of corruption that went on in D.C. Like they moved the Governor Whitmer case in Detroit. The head of the FBI in Detroit was moved to January 6th, 6 months before January 6th happened. So after he ran that off in Detroit, he went to D.C. and ran that off, and they brought an asset of a coroner to D.C. to cover up the murder.
Well, Tommy, this talk about how you've been treated, because there's been dozens, if not hundreds. There's been hundreds of people, questioned, interviewed, investigated by the DOJ surrounding January 6th, if not thousands. But talk about how you've been treated and this I don't know, the specifics of your story. That's why we have you on the program. But I know in other instances, the punishment far outweighs the crime, if there was even a crime. I know in some of these cases, it's even disputed whether there was even a crime or not. So talk about how you've been treated.
Yeah, so I actually have an atypical story, although I can address some of those things we're talking about. I actually covered the very first January 6th trial of a man named Guy Riffett, whom I later went on to live with his wife, with Ashley Babbitt's mother in D.C. Atypical story. But my personal thing is, after I moved to D.C. with Ashley Babbitt's mother doing the vigil that's outside the jail, we did that. I was there for a year doing that with her. But we also went into congressional committee hearings wherein Ashley Babbitt was murdered by the Capitol. We have seen some of that. And we had meetings with lots of lawyers and congressmen. And also, we went to a lot of the trials. And the ladies I lived with went to the trials every day. And, and this is a very true statement. If you want to have your fellow Americans lose all faith in their legal system in this country, have them go sit through a January 6th trial in America. And I tell you, if you think you have constitutional rights in this country, you're wrong. Those are a myth. If the government said you did it, you did it with this past regime. And that's why I'm so glad God intervened and put Donald Trump back into that.
Let me ask you this, Tommy. How many, pardons are clearly on the table. But, I kind of get mixed reviews on, like, does everybody need to be pardoned or just some people, or is this just going to be a case-by-case thing? Was there really so let me kind of preface this. The trespassing, to the extent that there was trespassing and any type of damaging of property, was clearly unacceptable. There wasn't much violence, if at all. There was some pushing and shoving and some oversized crowds, which is hard to handle from a law enforcement perspective. But there just wasn't, other than, once again, some damaged property and some trespassing, there really wasn't a lot of illegal activity going on January 6th. So what do you think President Trump should pardon all of them, some of them? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I'm not going to answer that, but just to preface it just a little bit, I did January 6th video research. I have probably seen at this point more footage than anybody else on the face of the earth, and I know the other guys who did too. So to answer your question, first of all, no charges anybody has are legit, okay? Because nobody had due process rights. We were set up, and I think that some of these people are talking about the Antifa or maybe federal law operators who are in the crowd doing things, and some of those guys did get arrested too. Even those charges aren't bona fide. I don't want them in charge. I don't want them in jail for a trespassing charge whenever they were committing treason. So I want a church-style committee like they did in the 70s, and the CIA was out of control, because it is impossible for Congress to investigate what happened on January 6th during 2 years of a congressional session when these people only work 3 days a week for about 3 hours a week. It is impossible for them. We need a full investigation, and I feel Donald Trump is going to do this. I honestly think this argument is just a lot of fear from people who don't want to go to jail, understandably. I know Donald Trump's going to do the right thing. He is a J6er. These same lies were said about him. And I have been in the room with Donald Trump on the phone with Ashley Babbitt's mother, and she didn't tell me what he said, but she feels confident Donald Trump's going to do the right thing. I'm not worrying about it at all.
Yeah, Ashley Babbitt, that was an injustice in and of itself. That shooting there, which clearly wasn't justified. When you look at the use of force protocol that law enforcement uses, that was actually a scenario that they would likely train you in law enforcement not to discharge your firearm, because you've got a crowd and there's no evidence of somebody being armed. I mean, that you could go through a checklist of 10 reasons why you should not discharge your firearm in that situation, but he did, and he was cleared, in air quotes, he was cleared by the DOJ and the Capitol Police.
Actually, yeah, it was the Capitol Police that cleared him.
Right. Yeah, he was cleared by the Capitol Police. Let me ask you this. in all of the hours you've put together and reviewed video footage, what do you? I mean, the FBI, the Inspector General report showed about 26 or 28 FBI assets in the crowd on January 6th. Do you know if that was just confidential informants, or does that include confidential informants and FBI agents? Because there's a difference between an asset and an informant and an agent. So have you gotten an answer on the differentiation there?
See, well, let me explain this in full. So I think that number, I think that what they admitted to, those 26 are informants. I don't even think they admitted to those being undercover agents. But that's all a red herring anyway. That's all crap. Because, and listen, my research shows this, and I've seen how that sausage is made in media now. In about a year or two, this is what we're all going to learn. That the very same people who tried to kill Donald Trump this past summer are the very same people who planned January 6th, and it's through the Department of Homeland Security, HSI. And the way this works is the CIA picks some Tier 1 operators, and these were under the DHSs because they were going out, like Jeremy Brown's case in Florida in October, agents to go to the Capitol to do the things that other people ended up doing. And when they go to court, the DOJ will tell the defense lawyers, we don't have to give you anything about any other agents, undercover agents, federal agents in this government that's not the FBI. And the reason that is because the FBI is oversaw directly by the Judiciary Committee, and the Department of Homeland Security, which was born out of the travesty of the Patriot Act, is oversaw by our good old favorite Denny Thompson. And they knew that Denny Thompson could run cover when they planned January 6th, and then he was going to be the chairman of the committee afterwards. And the DOJ knew that none of this information would ever be presented because the FBI doesn't have to be the.
Interesting. Tommy, where can folks find out more about your work and all the time and energy you've put into this, and some of your writings?
So I think what I did, I have a YouTube. It's called Tommy Tatum News, all one word. And right before the election, I basically took every clip I've ever got and put it on one file on there. It's called J6 Rough Cut. But other than that, Ben Taxton on Twitter is where I still do updated videos. And I honestly, before I let you go, Walter, I don't need to look at any more videos. I had a fair audience. I have plenty of videos that shows the cops. It shows the ops unfolding. It shows the cops breaking windows, dropping guns inside, picking them up, pointing them at police. It's ridiculous. And I'm not, because God put me on this path. God put me on this path, and He didn't bring me this far just to bring this far. And then what I failed to say real quick is when I was at the bottom of the pile, whenever all that extreme violence is going on, the only thing I could think to do was to pray. And I said, Jesus, please let there be a moment of calmness come over this crowd so we can get up and get away. And as soon as I said those words, a guy come up from behind me and tried to pull me up from the bottom of the pile. And I know now that action probably saved my life, and I think it saved several other lives. So, you know how we say prayers and we think God's eventually going to make it better for us in the future, or we're able for us to stomach it or whatever. But I prayed out to God that day. He literally answered my prayer in real time to save my life. I never want to forget to tell people that.
Hey, man. Well, Tommy, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for telling your story, and appreciate all the work you're doing on this subject.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
All right, appreciate it. That's Tommy Tatum out of Mississippi. He was there on January 6, 2021, and has done a lot of investigative journalism and reporting on this subject. And look, folks, you can't deny that the government has, number one, the capability, but also the intent, or the reasoning, if you will, for instigation, right? To instigate people towards things that they would have otherwise not engaged in. And I think the Gretchen Whitmer case is Exhibit A, how those men were just strung along, they were incentivized, they were pushed, they were prodded into alleged illegal activity, and they ended up getting exonerated. But nonetheless, wherever you fall on this, we've got to know the truth, and it's all got to get out there. And the Democrats clearly are not about uncovering the truth. So we'll continue tracking this. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Streaming.afa.net has now become AFA Stream, and you can find it at stream.afa.net. You see, we removed the letters ing. Our experts have determined that eliminating those 3 keystrokes, multiplied over hundreds of thousands of AFA Stream visits, could reduce the national debt and maybe increase the gross domestic product. AFA Stream, formerly streaming.afa.net. Improvements to the economy are purely theoretical.
AFA Action takes attacks on the family seriously. The enemies of the family constantly employ new tactics to try to sneak past our radar. They know if we stand together, their evil plans will fail. Your gift to AFA Action allows us to stay vigilant against their onslaught. And if you give this month, you'll receive access to the Cultural Institute video When Your Faith is Illegal by Frank Harbor on AFA Stream as our thanks. You can make your gift today at afaaction.net.
The words you are about to hear are taken from letters sent in by members of the Trinity Debt Management Program.
Dear Trinity, today I'm making my final credit card payment.
Before I came to you, I was in a constant state of anxiety and panic, but now there is hope for my family's financial future.
Working with Trinity made me understand that I'm not alone.
You really do help people.
Your kindness will never be forgotten.
Without Trinity's support, I would not have achieved my lifelong goal of becoming debt-free.
We saved a lot on interest and penalties, of course, but the reward was the gift of human kindness.
Trinity has carried me through a very difficult time in my life. You're amazing.
I used to feel so anxious and hopeless. Now I feel grace and peace.
God bless Trinity as you continue to help others become debt-free.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813.
When Mary found she was pregnant with Jesus, she immediately wanted to tell her older relative Elizabeth, who was also pregnant in her advanced years, with the baby who would become John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. When Mary and Elizabeth met, Elizabeth rejoiced that Mary was bearing the child whom her own son would one day serve. Was there even a suggestion of envy in Elizabeth's heart that her son would be the servant of Mary's son? None at all. Elizabeth rejoiced not only in God's blessing on her life, but on Mary's life as well. Christmas means rejoicing with those who rejoice. And this is David Jeremiah, encouraging you to get on the road to new life. Discover God's reasons to rejoice with others on Route 66.
Route 66, driving the word home. Log on to Route66Life.com. Start your journey home today.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to the program. Walker Wildmon here with you. Well, our guest last segment was Tommy Tatum. He's a Mississippi resident. He was there on January 6th, so he's got firsthand testimony. He's been doing extensive investigative journalism, reviewing the footage from January 6th, which is actually difficult to get that footage. It took a couple years, and finally the footage was released by, I believe, Speaker Mike Johnson. But just the fact that we had to pull teeth to get the footage released is in and of itself questionable and suspect. And the point is that this issue was weaponized. What in some instances was simple, trespass type instances, this thing was weaponized and snowballed into something that it should have never been. And that's what was done by the Democrats and Republicans too, Liz Cheney and others. So, and people have been treated very, very unfairly, and that's the angle we want to cover. Is people have been treated very unfairly, held without trial for years in the D.C. Prison, which is astonishing that can even happen in America, where you can sit in prison for months and years without a trial. What happened to speedy and fair trial? Another guest we have on now to talk about the same subject is Robert Morse. And he's a defendant, January 6th defendant. He's a former Army Ranger with the 2nd Battalion, and he's with us now. He's working on a book as well, which we'll talk about. But Robert, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a pleasure to speak to fellow Americans and also people that are passionate about the truth, which is the whole point of this book.
Absolutely. Well, before we jump into the book and your story, Robert, give us a little background there. Tell us how on earth you got involved with not only January 6th, but, all the stuff you've been covering since then and you've been involved in.
Sure. So to make a long story short, I was raised in Reno, Nevada, and taught to love what the founding fathers put into motion. And we have been blessed to be born in a country that has given more rights to its citizens than any other nation prior or afterward. And so I always had this love in my heart for this country. I joined the Army at 17, left my home in Reno, Nevada to become an Army Ranger, deployed to Afghanistan 3 times. But on my first trip to Afghanistan, I decided that I think I can make more of an impact in the classroom than I could with my M4. So I decided to dedicate my entire adult life to becoming a high school history teacher from that moment on, what I like to call the pillar of fate that fell on me on my first trip to Afghanistan in the wastelands of Sharana. When I returned, I came back with a plan. And that plan was to go to college, use my GI Bill benefits to get a degree, and then enter the field, most likely as the lone Republican, in that high school, which I wanted to teach at. And that's okay. I don't mind being outnumbered. But the idea was to teach students not just real history, but also to remind them to take pride in their American heritage, because we have one of the coolest, most romantic, most beautiful histories of this nation, warts and all. It beats them all, not only because of its historical context, but because it's ours. This is our home team. This is our land. And as an American, I felt like it was my responsibility to do so. Well, with all that love and passion combined with what we saw throughout the 2020 Summer of Love, and then the stolen election to top it all off, I decided to go to January 6th without any intention of getting sucked into the lobster trap that we know that it was today. My decision to arrive, as well as don the exact same uniform that I wore to Afghanistan 3 times in a row, was because of my love of country. I wore my plate carrier and my uniform to show that I had already invested sweat and blood equity into the freedom and the history of this country that I love so dearly. And so when I was arrested for my actions, the prosecution wasted no time to say, "See, Your Honor, he dressed up for war." And they used my military background against me. And so everything I had done was flipped upside down, and it was almost as if everything I had invested and sacrificed in didn't matter, because it was now being used to keep me in jail for crimes that other people throughout the Summer of Love in 2020 could have done, and they got a slap in the wrist for. So it's very devastating that we had a flirtation with communism in this country, but based off of what happened with Trump's reelection, I have so much more hope now than ever that we can finally make America great again.
Yeah, and to your point, Robert, about the double standard, that's what adds insult to injury here. Is not only did they, in many people's opinions, steal the election, and a lot of the facts bear that out, but then you look back on the previous year leading up to it, and America's cities were burned, and it was excused, right, because the means or the cause was justified, right? And so it was just and then the COVID lockdowns. So we were all beat down. We were beat wet puppy dogs. And then here comes the election, right? And they want to tell us that Biden got 17 more million votes than Trump. And it's are you kidding me?
Who decided not to vote for Kamala Harris this time around, surprisingly? So where did those millions of people go?
Yeah. I'm sorry, not 17 million that more, but there was a differentiation of 17 million between 2020 and 2024. Basically, 17 Democrats came out of nowhere in 2020 is what I'm getting at. So yeah, it was there. The context there was infuriating as a red-blooded American. And we were just getting like, triggered left and right. So that was the context of January 6th. And people were furious about it. And the media was trying to act like questioning the elections was somehow scandalous, even though they've been doing it forever, questioning the elections. But what happened to you after the fact? Like, tell us about your time in prison and how long it took for you to finally get a trial and stuff.
Sure. So when I was arrested, I was taken on June 11th, 2021. And that was also the last day of school at the high school that I had been teaching at. And a year and a half later on, when I finally got to see my discovery, the FBI gloats within my discovery that we need to arrest him on the last day of school because it's going to hurt him more. So, I mean, you say the words like insult to injury. That's all this was. They wanted to drive that fork into my back and everybody else's back that was a January 6th or every which way that they could. They didn't need to land helicopters and armored patrol carriers into people's backyards. They didn't need to have SWAT team raids and things like that. And that wasn't for us. That was for the American people to never get any idea that rising up is an option ever again. I digress. When I was locked up, obviously, my whole life is obliterated. But I languished in jail, I want to say, for almost 2 years before trial. And then my sentencing date kept getting pushed after that for almost, I want to say, half a year on top of that too. So I had been locked up for over 2 years prior to my sentencing date, which by then, I mean, if my lawyer had come up with the exonerating evidence, like the video footage where someone who can pass back and forth through the police line actually shoves me into the tunnel of the Capitol, if that had been brought up at my trial or my sentencing, I could have gone home. But they were willing to make this look like an actual insurrection and punish me as if that was the case so that the narrative would sound legitimate. It had nothing to do with actually taking a terrorist out of the community. You can ask anybody who was around me in my community and know that, one, I wasn't a terrorist, but two, that I actually contributed to it. So they were willing to ruin people's lives and up to force people to commit suicide because of the pressure that they were willing to put on the American people to submit. I mean, you have individuals like Matt Perna who took his own life because of the weight that was put on his shoulders by the federal government so that they could push a lie that is very similar to what took place in the Reichstag fires in the 1930s of Germany. Now, this is one connection of many that we try to make in the book that's available now. It's called One Question Remains. You can find it on Amazon. But this is a book that actually my buddy and I, Kelly Meggs, who's the Oath Keeper leader of the Florida chapter, we were in the Philadelphia holding center for about 2 months. And 1 month of that time, we put our heads together after a long game of chess, realizing that, oh my God, January 6th was a chess move. Because, as you know, in the game of chess, you use methods of sacrifice and deception in order to win. Well, that's exactly what January 6th was. It was a lobster trap styled chess move. And so that's what motivated us to put all these things down on paper so that our readers can, now understand what's hiding behind the curtain of January 6th. And they can find that all out in the book called One Question Remains. And it's a story that reads and sounds like a conspiracy theory, but we make the connection of the Matrix as well, where Neo has to follow the white rabbit to learn the truth and take the red pill. That's exactly what this book is, a red pill in paper form.
Yeah, and we are a Christian radio network, so I want to clarify that. And I hope you were using the Lord's name in a genuine manner and not,
Absolutely.
But I wanted to ask you another question, Robert, about to your point. It does seem like it wasn't the holding, the pre-trial treatment was the goal, it seems like, because if they would have done an expedited and speedy and fair trial, which is what every American should be afforded, even those that we disagree with, then it's very possible, or it's very likely, that you would have been exonerated in that trial. And we'll get to your kind of how your situation ended, and maybe it did end in a trial. I'm not sure, but that would have not worked in the advantage of the narrative, if you see what I'm saying. And so the evidence coming out would have actually worked against the narrative. So that's why I believe, and you probably know more about this, holding you guys for months and years on end kind of was the goal. That was the strategy. That way the narrative can be continued and the committee can do all their junk, et cetera, et cetera. So talk about that, and talk about kind of how your case played out after that, some 2.5 years behind bars.
Sure. Well, the saying goes that the process is the punishment, right? So whether or not you're guilty or not, they got their pound of flesh because they were willing to drag you through the mud, whether or not you're innocent or not. And these are the types of people that are running our justice system as of now. The prosecutor and the judge are all complicit in trying to sell a narrative that we know to be completely false. But that is, it's something that you would find in maybe Russia or China, not here, not in these United States. And so it's a sin against mankind. It's a sin against our founding fathers. But I agree. This is a Christian radio station. It's a sin against God himself. If you're going to perpetuate a lie and ruin the fortunes and honor and lives of your fellow Americans, there's no greater sin than that. And so, but they were willing to do it because the truth, as they are fully aware, sets men free. That's what our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ says. And this is actually playing out verbatim in real time and before everybody's eyes on a global stage, not just with the January 6ers and not just with, Trump, I believe, getting saved with a miracle on live television here in Butler County, Pennsylvania, where I'm literally down the road from. This is a situation where if you genuinely consider that the Word became flesh, we're about to celebrate his birth in a couple of days now, and you put your faith in God, you are actually going to see God show off in your lifetime. And this is happening now. These are undeniable things that are taking place where Scripture is being confirmed in scenarios like I just referenced. And the people that decide to take the opposing position, they will be cast out where there is gnashing of teeth. And I think that, with what you said earlier, in the earlier program about how, there is such a disparity between the truth and what actually has been propagated, with just like the Gretchen Whitmer abduction and this situation, it's an entrapment by estoppel scenario. And we go into that in the book as well. But the way that it went down was my lawyer, the prosecution, and the judge were willing to look the other way while I suffered unjustly. And while evidence kept getting discovered by independent journalists, by individuals like Julie Kelly, who put their record on the line to uncover things like Tucker Carlson, who gets kicked off the air because he's willing to show the world what everybody thought, but no one was willing to say on live television about how January 6th was in fact a lobster trap.
Yeah.
Their lives were ruined, but not forever. We were struck down, but not destroyed.
Yeah, good points, Robert. We got about 30 seconds left. Hey, tell our folks, 15 seconds, your website, how they can find out more about your work.
www.akalegoman.com with 2 G's. You won't want to miss out.
All right, www.akalegoman with 2 G's.com. Hey, Robert, thanks for telling your story.
Thank you for the opportunity. God bless.
All right, appreciate that. That's Robert Morse, and his website is AKA The Lego Man with 2 G's, telling his story about January 6th, his upcoming book, his time in prison, and we'll be back.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American